The night was calm in the desert outpost, the kind of stillness that made every small sound seem loud. Daniel sat outside his small hut, leaning back in a chair and watching the stars. It was his favorite thing to do after a long day of work. Out here, far from any big colony, the stars were brighter, and the silence was deep. He had been living alone for months now, fixing machines and keeping the small supply station running. It was a quiet life, and most nights were uneventful. But this night was different. At first, he thought it was just his eyes playing tricks on him. A faint flicker moved across the sky, quick and irregular, almost like a star was shaking. He leaned forward, squinting. The flicker grew brighter, turning into a streak of light that cut across the dark horizon. It wasn't like a meteor. It moved too slowly, and its glow changed colors from white to a faint blue. Then, without warning, it dipped lower, trailing smoke. Daniel's heart started beating faster. Something was coming down. The streak grew larger until he could hear it, a low hum mixed with a high-pitched whine. His instincts kicked in. He grabbed his jacket and a flashlight, then started running toward the direction of the crash. Sand crunched under his boots as the sound of impact echoed through the desert. He saw a bright flash in the distance, followed by a short, muffled thud. A column of faint smoke rose under the starry sky. When Daniel finally reached the spot, the air was warm, and the smell of burnt metal filled his nose. Before him lay a small spacecraft, unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface shimmered, faintly even in the dark, as if the metal itself was alive. The ship had taken heavy damage. Panels bent inward, a wing-like structure snapped off, and sparks danced along one side. Cautiously, Daniel stepped closer. Through a cracked section of the hull, he saw movement. He aimed his flashlight inside, and froze. There, leaning against the inner wall, was a girl. Or at least, she looked like one. Her skin was pale with a faint silvery tint, and her long hair was almost white, catching the light like threads of frost. Her eyes reflected the beam of his flashlight, glowing faintly in a way no human's eyes could. And then he noticed something else. Her teeth. Two elongated canines rested slightly over her lower lip, making her look like something out of an old Earth story. She was breathing hard, each breath quick and shallow. Her clothes, thin, dark, and torn, were smeared with dust and something. That looked faintly blue, which Daniel guessed was her blood. He could tell she was hurt. "Hey," he called gently, crouching near the opening. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" Her gaze met his for a moment, and he saw a strange mix of fear and need in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words came out weak and broken in a language he didn't know. Then, almost unconsciously, her gaze drifted to his neck and stayed, there for a heartbeat too long. Daniel shifted slightly, not understanding why, but he could see she was struggling to stay awake. He looked at the damaged ship, then back at her. She wouldn't survive out here in the cold desert night. Without thinking much more, he squeezed through the gap in the hull and carefully slid one arm under her shoulders, lifting her gently. She was lighter than he expected, almost too light, and her body was trembling as though she was freezing. She made a faint sound of protest, but she didn't have the strength to resist. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." The walk back to his hut was slow. The desert air had turned cold, and the stars above felt sharper, brighter. He could feel her shallow breathing against his arm. Every so often she opened her eyes and glanced at him, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. When they finally reached the hut, Daniel pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. He laid her gently on the small bed in the corner, then hurried to fetch water. She looked around weakly, her gaze darting from the walls to the shelves, almost as if she had never been inside a place like this before. Daniel brought the water to her lips, but she turned her head away. He frowned and tried again, but she pushed his hand aside. "Not this," she whispered, her voice faint and strange, carrying an accent he had never heard. He didn't know what she meant, but it was clear something was wrong. She pressed a hand to her chest and closed her eyes, her breathing still uneven. He pulled up a chair next to the bed, unsure of what else to do. Outside, the desert night was silent again, but Daniel's mind was full of questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what had brought her ship down? For now, none of that mattered as much as one thing. She needed help. He didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't just let her fade away. Daniel sat by the bed for a long time, watching the pale stranger breathe. The small lamp on the table gave the room a soft glow, and the desert wind whispered outside. He had tried water again, but she refused it. He even warmed some food, bread, soup, a bit of dried fruit, but she pushed it away without a word. Her hands trembled when she moved, and her lips were dry, but not in the way someone gets when they are thirsty for water. He studied her face. She had delicate features, almost too perfect, but there was a strange tension in her expression, like she was fighting something inside herself. Her eyes kept flicking to him, then away, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Daniel noticed her hands clenching and unclenching on the blanket. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not enough." Daniel leaned closer. "What's not enough?" She hesitated, then closed her eyes as if gathering strength. "Your food, water, not what I need." Her words came slowly, and her accent made them sound musical but heavy. He frowned. "Then what do you need?" Her eyes opened, glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Plasma, from living." Daniel froze for a moment, trying to understand. He had heard of alien species that needed unusual nutrition, certain gases, rare minerals, or even radiation. But plasma? That was in blood. "You mean—" He stopped, unsure if he should even say it. She nodded slowly, as if she knew he had figured it out. "My kind. Thrila. We travel far, always search. But pirates?" She winced and clutched her side. "They damaged ship, took stores. No supply left." The word Thrila meant nothing to Daniel, but the rest was clear enough. She had been attacked in space, stranded, and now was starving for something she couldn't get here, something living beings carried inside them. He leaned back in the chair, trying to think. "So, without it, you'll—" Her eyes softened in a way that made him uneasy. "Fade. Soon." She looked away quickly as though ashamed. Daniel wasn't afraid exactly, but there was a weight in the air now. He remembered how she had glanced at his neck earlier, the hunger hidden in her tired eyes. She had been trying not to ask. He could tell she didn't want to harm him. That much was clear in the way she avoided eye contact now. "Can you take it from anyone?" he asked carefully. "Not animals, only your kind, or close," she murmured. "But I won't. Not without—" She shook her head. "It's not right." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Daniel noticed how her breathing had grown shallow again, as if speaking had drained her energy. For the next hour, Daniel tried to distract himself by checking the small heater and organizing his tools, but he kept glancing at her. She looked weaker by the minute. Her skin, already pale, seemed to lose more color, and her glowing veins dimmed slightly. Finally, he sat back down and asked, "How much time do you have?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "A few hours, maybe less. But I don't want to take from you. Not without choice." Her words settled in his mind like a heavy stone. This wasn't a predator cornering prey. This was someone fighting her own nature to avoid hurting him. That realization made it harder to ignore the truth. If he did nothing, she would die. He thought about the way she had crashed, the way she had looked at him when he found her. She was alone, injured, and in a strange place. If their positions were reversed, would he want someone to help him? He knew the answer. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the wind outside. Daniel's thoughts turned over and over until finally he leaned forward. "I can't promise I understand all of this," he said slowly, "but I think I know what you're asking. Or what you're not asking." Her eyes met his sharply, as if she already knew where this was going. "Daniel," she said, her voice almost pleading. "Don't." But the longer he looked at her, the more certain he became. It wasn't fear he felt. It was the decision forming inside him, solid and steady. "I've seen enough people suffer," he said quietly. "If I can stop that, I will. Even if it's strange." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at him as though trying to read his thoughts, trying to see if he truly meant it. Daniel stood and stepped closer to the bed. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands curled into fists. She was still trying to resist. "You saved me," she whispered, "when you pulled me from the wreck. That is enough. I don't need—" She cut herself off as a wave of weakness made her sway slightly. Daniel crouched beside her. "You're not going to fade away in my bed while I do nothing. I don't care if it's unusual. You need something I can give. That's all I need to know." Her gaze softened, but there was still disbelief there. "Humans don't offer this. Not to strangers. Not to my kind." "Well," Daniel said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "maybe you just met the wrong kind of human before." She stared at him for another long moment, and for the first time since they met, her eyes held something other than pain, something like hope, but mixed with shock. Daniel sat back for a moment, his mind steady now, no longer filled with the back-and-forth thoughts that had been pulling at him all evening. The pale stranger, Selvara, as she had quietly told him, was leaning against the wall, trying to hide how weak she had become. Her glowing eyes flickered faintly and her breathing was uneven. Every part of her looked tired, yet she still held herself with a quiet dignity, as if she refused to appear desperate. He knew she was trying to protect him from the truth. She didn't want to ask. She didn't want to cross a line. But Daniel had already made up his mind. He moved his chair closer to the bed so she wouldn't have to strain her voice. "Selvara," he said softly, "you told me what you need. I understand enough to know it's not something you can find out here. If I'm the only option, then I'm offering." Her head lifted slightly, but she didn't answer right away. She just stared at him, as if his words were strange sounds she couldn't believe she was hearing. "You don't know what you're saying?" she finally whispered. "I think I do," Daniel replied, keeping his voice calm. "You take what you need. I'll be fine." She shook her head sharply. "You're human. Your blood, your life. It is not endless. Even a little could weaken you." Daniel smiled faintly. "I've been through worse." Her expression changed, the faint glow in her eyes flickering like a candle about to go out. She looked away, her voice quiet but firm. "Among my people, offering blood is not simple. It is sacred. It means trust. And if I took it from you, you would become bloodkin. That bond is not meant to be made lightly." Daniel thought about that for a moment. Then maybe this is one of those times when it's worth it. She seemed stunned by his calmness. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you risk yourself for me? We met only hours ago." Daniel leaned his elbows on his knees, thinking carefully before answering. "Because you're alive. Because you didn't attack me when you could have. And because you're in trouble. That's enough for me." The room fell quiet again. The small hum of the heater filled the space between them. Outside, the wind swept across the sand, brushing against the walls of the hut. Finally, Selvara's gaze returned to him. "If you truly mean this, you must know. It will not be like you imagine. It is not pain I fear giving you, it is the bond." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Then I'll take the bond too." For a long moment she said, "Nothing." Her eyes searched his face for any sign of hesitation, but he held her gaze without flinching. Slowly, she sat up straighter, wincing at the effort. Her voice trembled now, not from weakness alone, but from something deeper. "If you are certain, give me your hand." Daniel extended his arm, pulling up the sleeve. She looked at it for a moment, as though still deciding whether she could go through with it. Then she shook her head slightly. "Not the wrist," she said softly. "That is for feeding without meaning. The bond is here." She touched lightly to the side of his neck. Daniel didn't move. His heartbeat felt louder now, but not from fear, more from the strange gravity of the moment. She had made it clear this wasn't just survival. This was something her people treated with deep respect. Selvara hesitated again, her breathing uneven. "Once I begin, I will take only what I need, but you must not move, and when it's done, you may feel different." He gave a single nod. "I trust you." Those 3 words seemed to shake her more than anything else. She took a slow breath, then leaned closer. Her cold fingers brushed lightly against his jaw as she steadied herself. Daniel could feel her presence, her closeness, and a strange calm settled over him. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "This is not just life I take, but life I share." Then, with a carefulness that surprised him, she lowered her lips to the side of his neck. The first touch was barely felt, a slight pressure, and then there was the faintest prick, sharp but quick. Daniel tensed for a moment, expecting pain, but instead there was a slow warmth that spread from the point of contact. It was an unusual sensation, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just deeply strange. He felt light, as though part of him was being carried away. Yet at the same time, there was an odd sense of connection, as if some invisible thread now tied him to her. Selvara's breathing deepened slightly as she drew from him, but there was no greed in it, only restraint. She took in slow, measured pulls, pausing now and then as if to make sure he was still steady. Daniel realized in that moment that he could feel something from her, not in words, but in a quiet, emotional pulse. Gratitude, relief, and beneath it, a deep loneliness. When she finally pulled back, her movements were careful, almost ceremonial. She pressed her fingertips gently against the spot, sealing it with a faint warmth that made the skin tingle. Her eyes met his again, and now the glow in them was steady, vibrant. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. "You are blood kin now, Daniel. That is not a thing my people forget." Daniel sat back, feeling a little lightheaded but not weak. "Good," he said with a faint smile. "Then I guess we're stuck with each other." For the first time, Selvara's lips curved into something close to a real smile, small but genuine. The bond was made. Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling the faint thump of his heart slowing to its normal rhythm. The warmth at his neck faded, leaving only a light tingling sensation, almost like the echo of what had just happened. Selvara sat quietly on the bed, her hands resting in her lap. Her shoulders no longer sagged, and the faint glow in her veins was brighter now, steady instead of flickering. For the first time since he had found her, she looked alive. She closed her eyes briefly, as though savoring the change in her body. When she opened them again, her gaze was softer, no longer clouded with strain. "You kept your word," she said in a low voice. Daniel gave a small shrug. Told you I would. Her lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. You do not understand what you have done. Among the Thryla, blood is not traded, not given casually. It is a piece of the soul, carried from one to another. That bond cannot be broken. I didn't give it to break it, Daniel replied simply. The wind outside rattled the door lightly, and for a while neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It felt almost peaceful. Daniel noticed her posture was changing. She no longer curled in on herself as though protecting her ribs. There was strength in her again, even if she wasn't fully healed. How do you feel? He asked. She tilted her head, thinking about the question. Like the sun has returned after a long eclipse. My body, it listens to me again. He smiled faintly at the poetic answer. Good. That's the point. Selvara studied him for a moment, her gaze steady. And you? Does the bond make you afraid? Daniel shook his head. No. I've worked with machines all my life. I know when a connection is solid. This one feels steady. She seemed to consider his words carefully, as though weighing something important. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, I can feel you too. Your heartbeat, your mood, not your thoughts, but the shade of them. That is part of being blood-kin. Daniel raised an eyebrow. So, what do you sense right now? Her eyes narrowed slightly, though not in a threatening way. Calm and curiosity. You are wondering about me, and you are not afraid. That is unusual. Daniel chuckled quietly. Maybe I just don't scare easy. Selvara glanced around the small room then, her gaze settling on his workbench. Tools lay scattered across it. Wrenches, a welding kit, spare wiring. You repaired my ship, she said, not as a question, but as an observation. Started repairs, Daniel corrected. You've still got a lot of damage, especially on the starboard thrusters. I'll need more time. Her expression softened, though it still carried a hint of formality. You could have left it in the sand. Left me there too. I could have, Daniel admitted. But I don't leave people behind if I can help it. She gave a slow nod, as though adding that piece of information to whatever picture she was forming of him. Then perhaps the bond is not misplaced. Over the next hour, Daniel busied himself by heating more water and bringing out a fresh blanket for her. She watched him move around the hut, her gaze following him with a quiet attentiveness. When he handed her a mug of warm herbal tea, something that wouldn't replace what she had taken but might bring comfort, she accepted it without the hesitation she'd shown before. This is strange to me, she admitted, holding the mug close. To be inside a human dwelling, to drink something that is not ours, to feel safe here. Daniel leaned back against the wall. Then maybe you should get used to it, at least until your ship's ready. Her eyes lingered on him again, thoughtful. You speak as if we have much time, but pirates may return, or those who hunt my people. I brought danger with me when I fell here. Daniel's expression didn't change. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. The simplicity of his answer made her look at him longer than before, as though she couldn't decide if he was foolish or brave. Finally, she said, You do not know the scale of the danger, but how I believe you mean what you say. Outside, the desert grew darker as the night deepened, the air colder. Inside, the small heater hummed steadily. Daniel returned to his workbench, checking over a panel he had removed from her ship earlier. Selvara watched, occasionally asking questions about his tools or the way he repaired things. It surprised him. She had been so guarded before, but now she seemed willing to listen and learn. At one point, Daniel caught her glancing at the door as if checking the outside. Expecting someone? He asked. No, she said, then added quietly, But the bond makes me aware of distance. If you were to leave, I would feel it. That is new to me. It feels different. Daniel nodded slowly. Guess we'll both have to adjust. A silence settled again, but it was warmer now, less like two strangers and more like an unspoken understanding had formed. Selvara finished her tea, set the mug aside, and lay back on the bed. Her movements were more fluid now, no longer heavy, with exhaustion. Daniel kept working on the damaged panel until he noticed her watching him again, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. When I was drifting, before I saw this planet, I thought I would die alone. You changed that. Daniel looked up from his tools. Glad I was here then. Her gaze held his for a moment longer before she closed her eyes, resting at last. Daniel returned to his repairs, but in the back of his mind, the bond pulsed quietly, like the slow, steady hum of an engine that was now running in the background of his life. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew one thing. They were connected now, and nothing in the galaxy could erase that. The morning light crept gently through the small windows of Daniel's hut, casting soft patterns across the dusty floor. Outside, the desert was waking up, the heat slowly rising as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Inside, the air was still, calm, but there was a new sense of purpose between Daniel and Selvara. Her strength had returned in the quiet hours of the night, and she now sat up on the bed with more energy than before. The soft glow in her eyes no longer flickered with weakness, but shone steadily, a sign that the bond they had formed was helping her heal. Daniel was finishing his last checks on the repaired ship panel, carefully placing it in a sturdy case. He looked over at Selvara, who was watching him with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, respect, maybe even gratitude. It's ready, Daniel said simply. I fixed what I could with what I have. Your ship should run long enough to get you to the next station, where they can do a full repair. Selvara nodded slowly, a small smile touching her lips. You have done more than I expected, more than anyone would. Daniel shrugged. I do what I can. There was a pause between them, filled with the sound of their breathing and the faint desert wind outside. Selvara's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, and then she looked back up with quiet determination. There is something I must do before I leave, she said. In my culture, when bloodkin part, an oath is sworn. It binds us, not just to the past, but to the future. Daniel raised an eyebrow. An oath? She nodded. Yes. It means that no matter the distance, no matter the time, the bond holds. We protect each other. We answer each other's call. Daniel smiled softly. Sounds like a good deal. Selvara's eyes shone with a strange light as she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was gentle but firm, as if sealing an invisible contract. Daniel, I swear before the stars and the ancestors of my people, I will protect you as my blood kin. And when you call, I will come. Daniel squeezed her hand in return. And I'll be ready. The moment felt heavy and full of meaning, a promise stretching across worlds and time. After a while, Selvara stood carefully, testing her strength. She walked over to the door and looked back at Daniel. Thank you, for your courage, for your kindness. Daniel nodded, standing as well. Take care of yourself out there. And remember, if you ever need help, you've got someone who owes you. Selvara's smile was genuine now, warm despite the exhaustion still in her eyes. She stepped out into the bright desert morning, the sunlight catching the metallic parts of her ship. Daniel watched as she climbed aboard and started the engines. The hum filled the quiet space, steady and strong. As the ship lifted slowly off the ground, Selvara looked back one last time. Her eyes met Daniel's through the cockpit window, and she gave a small nod. Then, with a burst of light and speed, she soared upward, disappearing into the wide blue sky above the desert. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the silence of the morning wrapping around him. He felt the strange warmth at his neck again, the faint reminder of the bond that connected him to someone far beyond the stars. He knew this was not the end. Somewhere out there, Selvara carried his name, his promise, and the unbreakable bond they shared. And if ever the galaxy turned dark or danger came near, they would find each other again. For now, he returned inside, ready to face the quiet life of the outpost, but forever changed by the strange, shining connection that began. One desert night with a thirsty vampire alien girl shocked when a human offered his blood,